Hey, what's up, everybody? And welcome to another episode of Tales from the Stash. You already know what I do here. See those kits in the back? Those are unbuilt kits. I take one out, share it with you guys. That's about it. I'm not going any further. So, what I got in my hands this time around, this magnificent little kit. This is Kinetic. That is the Kinetic 148 scale FA-18 Hornet. This is actually the second boxing. The first boxing was the C. The second one is of the A, the B, and the Canadian version. But before we get into this kit, I'll give you a little long story short about the FA-18 Hornet. The FA-18 Hornet is a U.S. Navy swing fighter, or first true multi-role fighter, as they would call it. It was designed to replace the F-4 Phantom, the A-4 Skyhawk, the A-7 Corsair. Its history could be traced all the way back to the lightweight fighter competition that was issued by the Air Force, and which was the General Dynamics F-16 and the Northrop YF-17. The loser of the competition was the Northrop aircraft, of course. The F-16 Fighting Falcon history speaks for itself. But it ended up, the YF-17 ended up being the basis for the FA-18 Hornet, which was built by McDonnell Douglas. It seemed, and even though it was based off of that, they only have a passing resemblance to each other. Long story short, the Hornet has seen more combat, excuse me, Hornet has seen more combat than my measuring tape has seen action at work. That's the best way to describe a Hornet. It entered the United States Navy and the Marines in 1983-84. First taste of combat was in 1986 during Operation El Dorado Canyon and Prairie Fire. And after that, it was Operation Desert Storm, a couple of other actions involving Iraq. Then it was Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, back to Iraq again, more stuff in Afghanistan. The Hornet itself is actually, like I said before, it's the first true multi-role aircraft. It can perform air-to-air and air-to-ground. It can't carry very much due to lack of range, but it can carry a wide variety of weapons, pods, and the like. It can actually do air-to-air and air-to-ground at the same time, as demonstrated in Desert Storm. The only drawbacks to the Hornet, even though it's a very versatile aircraft, is its lack of range. It doesn't have the long range like the F-14 or the A-6 did during that time. But it was able to, like I said, it was able to carry a wide variety of weapons accurately, more or less. So whenever you see a Hornet, like not the later versions of the Hornet, like the E or the F, but the older legacy models, starting from the A to the D, you rarely see them without fuel tanks. You'll see one, sometimes two, sometimes all three, depending on how far it's got to go. But the Hornet can do more than just air-to-air and air-to-ground. It can also do fast FAC, which is forward air control, and it can also perform reconnaissance, but that didn't start happening until towards the end of the 90s into 2000 on, with once it got the new reconnaissance system in place. And it's a very versatile aircraft. It also hasn't seen quite the success like the F-16 has, but it's got its fair share of customers. It serves with Australia, Canada, Spain, Malaysia, Switzerland, Finland, and Kuwait, alongside the United States Navy and the Marines. So, leave it at that. So, we're going to talk about the Kinetic kit. Now, there's been a few, now when the Hornet first came into like service and when they were doing full-scale development, the testing and stuff, many companies, model kit companies, rushed out to put out the first Hornet kit. And some of them it varied. Some of them were varying degrees of success. But as production for the Hornet went on, model kit companies adjusted accordingly. Before the Hasegawa kit came out in the 90s, the only semi-decent kit available was the monogram FA-18 Hornet kit, which was okay, but it's typical monogram. Raised panel lines, so-so fit, but the detail was pretty good. However, it wasn't a perfect kit, like every other Revell monogram kit during that time. But it was still better than most of them until Hasegawa came along. Then, as I said before, Hasegawa came along with theirs back in the 90s. Wonderful kit, but it had its hang-ups, particularly with lack of ordnance and price, but we'll not talk about that. And we'll focus on part 2 on with that. I should say we'll focus on that kit in part 2, but we're going to focus on the Kinetic, which is the first Hornet kit in 1/48 scale since the Hasegawa kit. Yeah, or I should say all new, and it's quite impressive. Well, anyway, let's get on with the kit here. This is actually the second boxing from Kinetic. The first one was the C. Then they did this one. Many more options in this as compared to the Kinetic FA-18C kit. And they also have 2 other boxings. You have the Blue Angels release and a Canadian Air Force Special Edition release, which has some pretty nice looking aviation art on it. And the kits are very good. I'm not going to gloss over the plastic or the details or too much about the kit itself. But I'm going to say this about Kinetic. Kinetic has come a long way since they released their F-16 kits back in the 2000s. They've come a very, very long way. The details improved drastically by more sharper detail. The plastic no longer has the grainy effect on it like they did in the earlier releases, and each kit that Kinetic models has released has gotten better and better, and the Hornet kit is a perfect example of that. So let's get into the box. Let me show you what's in this kit here. So here's the first half of it, and I'll be talking about the kit as I go. Now, I haven't picked up the FA-18C kit that they released, but I do have this one. Now, the Kinetic Hornet kit is actually pretty good. It's a very good kit. I don't know how it builds, so I had to look around online to see how it built, including a couple of videos. And if you're familiar with Kinetic, or I'm starting to get familiar with them, they're kind of iffy. Fit department's kind of iffy. I mean, they got good detail and they do provide a lot of options, but the fit's not that great. It's kind of like dealing with a monogram kit, for that matter. And we've dealt with monogram at one point or another in our lives of model building, especially Revell monogram. Like the old monogram kits, details were good, but the fit was so-so, and there were certain things you had to tackle. Kinetic's no different. Kinetic kind of reminds you that it's something you got to work at, which it can be a mix. It can be a blessing and a curse. For beginners, it might be discouraging to continue with it, but for intermediate to older modelers, it's no big deal for them. And my attitude about model building in general is, if you're not putting the time and the effort to make a nice model, it's not worth it. I'm serious, it is, and that's why I still build the old monogram kits on occasion. But before I go off on a tangent here, let's get back to the Kinetic kit. Now, when Kinetic first came out with their FA-18C kit, it came out as is. It was single seat C model, and you could tell there's going to be more potential for like future releases, and they had that intention. Well, like I said, got this magnificent beast. So let's pop into it. Now, the Kinetic kit, they gave you a wide variety of options. You got 4 different types of under half of the lower nose section, and like they give you the early, which in this release you can actually build from the A all the way to the D. So it depends on what you want to do, especially if you have the research, you have the decals and the like. Matter of fact, this is just like I said, this is just one of them. Which one is this? This is for separate wings here. The kit itself, like I said, it's a good kit. It really is. Matter of fact, here's the tail for the C variant right here. Or if you want to build a D, you can, since this version actually provides parts not just for the single-seater, but for a 2-seater. The last company that was able to do that was Tallery, which used to be distributed under Testers. Here's the tails for the A variant, by the way. This is actually for Canadian Hornet, or I think Australia had these too. I don't remember. I know Kuwait did. This is for a Searchlight, which Canada uses quite often, or the Canadians use in their Hornets quite often. This is more parts here. Got this part, A tails, different. This is the center. This is actually one of the 2 centerline pylons right here. As I said before, this kit's loaded with options, of course. We're going to go through everything. So I do apologize for, looks like if I'm rushing through like an idiot. Here's the upper half. Very similar layout. Now, right here, here's the tail fins. got the flaps, speed brake. Basically, it's basically generally similar layout. Matter of fact, here's the clear parts, by the way. This is for the 2-seat. This is for the single seat. Of course, it's got the pesky seam line in the middle of the canopy, like every other modern manufacturer's done. Mostly seems to be with the Teen Fighter, starting from like the F-14 Tomcat to the Hornet. And I think they did the same thing with the F-22. I'm not sure with other model manufacturers. As you can see here, of course, seam lines also on the windscreen here, as you can tell here. For newer modelers, leave it alone. If you're not sure, look it up on. If you want to try to remove it, look it up online. What you got to do. For modelers who've dealt with this problem, we already know what to do. Okay, this is the other layouts here. Of course, Kinetic has the typical wheel well hubs, the tires, which you paint the hubs, glue the tires on, paint them. The options are pretty good. The kit itself gives you the option of neutral or lowered flaps, of course, which is pretty good. The actual, when the aircraft's on the ground, the flaps drop. Of course, this is for the afterburner section. Here, let's see what else we got. We also have the nose cone, the cockpit. This is what I mean by it gives you the option of building single seat or 2-seat. If you want to build a single seat, you just put the avionics hellhole piece over this, keep it as is. You're not, you go with that. There's the landing gear. This is actually very good for the landing gear. Few companies have screwed up on the landing gear, particularly those in the main gear. I'm talking about Hobby Boss. They suck at that. Hoskow molded theirs in a white metal, but we'll talk about that, about the Hoskow kit. Here's the other parts as I throw them out into the box. This is a sniper pod, got a lantern pod. This also comes with a flare pod, by the way, kids. Here's the parts for the single seat. What else we got here? Of course, pylons and fuel tanks, which are here. There's your fuel tanks. There's your pylons. Parts for the nose gear, drop flaps, intakes. The intakes are very similar to the Academy kit, from what I heard. I never got to build the Academy 132nd kit, and this is actually quite a feat. Not many. If you've built enough Hornet kits in 48 scale, you know that the layouts, even though it's still the same shapes, the layouts are a little different. Like Hoskow, they kept, even though they did one of these, they broke it into like several different pieces, which is, sorry about that, but my folks. But for Kinetic, this is actually quite an accomplishment. Let me pop this open here. They actually give a single piece lower fuselage. This is quite an accomplishment right here. Hoskow has got it similar, but more parts to put together with the lower fuselage assembly. So, let's see. Also, they provide a sheet of photo etch, which is right here. This is brass. They have a harness. They have the, of course, rear view mirrors, chaff flare dispensers. I think these are braces. I don't remember offhand. Vents for two kinds. You could do the early or late FA-18s. Interior for the nose gear parts right here. Heads up display. I'm not very fond of the photo etch heads up. It's very fussy for me, and like I said before, I don't like photo etch, but I'll give this a try. I'll try to scratch build, which I'm better off doing. Like I said before, this is quite an accomplishment. Here's the weapons option for the Hornet kit. As you can tell here, this is more or less a generic. These are more or less become the generic, these kind of weapons. You can find these in the AMX kit. You can find them in the Harrier kit probably. And these will actually go back to the Kinetic Models F-16 kits, give or take, depending on what you're building. This is the decals, designed by Cross Delta, and it was printed by Chronograph, so they're pretty good. This boxing here gives you the option of Spanish, Australian, or Canadian Hornet. It would have been nice if they added a couple other options, but decals, but we'll not get into that. But the kit itself, it looks very promising. I don't know how it builds. I did watch a couple videos online about how it builds and stuff. There are some trouble spots, but I won't know until I find out. So I'll probably end up working on that. Once I get to this, I'll start working on it. Most of the details are very good. Cockpit itself, it's fine. You don't really need an aftermarket set. I mean, if you want to put more, you can. But this is still a new kit, so they probably haven't put out any aftermarket stuff yet. And most Kinetic kits, you don't really need to get any aftermarket stuff unless you want to replace things. Personally, I would replace the main gear tires and the nose gear tires in this kit because they seem a little small. They're not like, they seem a little small to me. I mean, I could be wrong. I'll have to compare them to the Hosokawa kit. What else is here? The good part about this kit is it covers all the latest updates to all the variants of the Legacy Hornet, which I'll show you the fuselage here. This includes the bird slicer antennas when they installed the new radar in the earlier models of the FA-18 Hornet, particularly A and the B. They added the bird slicer antennas, so if you want to backdate this, very easy to do. You just remove the bird slicer antennas and problem solved. And the good part about this, like the Hosokawa kit, it's got the holes for the LUX braces, it's got the 3 tabs on each vertical stabilator. So if you want to build an early Hornet, you don't add those on, fill in some spots, problem solved. And I think what really impresses me about this kit, as I nose my way through, and you can tell there's going to be upcoming releases. I don't know if it's this one here. Ah, there it is, right in front of me. This gives you parts for, this is for a reconnaissance version of the 2-seat FA-18. Matter of fact, this is the ATARs, as I was talking about. So there will be another release from Kinetic's Hornet line, which is coming out very soon, which is really nice. They, like I said, it covers a lot of everything with the Hornet from early all the way to late. So you get to pick and choose your options. Like I said, here's the newer style centerline pylon. It does have the older pylon, centerline pylon somewhere. Don't know where it is. I'll find it eventually. I'm still thumbing through everything, but as I said before, Kinetic has come a long way with this kit. There are a few complaints I do have, at least with this boxing. Now, the C boxing gives you the AGM-88, gives you Sparrows, missiles, gives you other, and of course it's got the same generic loadout. GBU-12s, cluster bombs, the JDAMs, AIM-120s, but with an A and a B, it would have been really nice if they added at least the AIM-7 Sparrow missiles to the kit, because the Hornet, particularly the early versions, always carried the AIM-7 Sparrows and the AIM-9 Sidewinders, at least for basic armament, especially if you're going to do an early FA-18 Hornet. My other complaint about this kit would be, it would be nice to have, like, for some reason, a lot of model companies have been doing this as of late. They give you decals from a certain point on. The Hornet has, even though the decals are drab, I mean, not the decals, the markings for the FA-18 Hornet are drab during that time. It would have been nice if they added markings for Desert Storm or Bosnia or Kosovo, or even for, which I hold dear to my heart because my older brothers were in the Navy, was during Operation El Dorado Canyon and Operation Prairie Fire, because my older brothers were actually on the carriers, the USS Coral Sea, when the Hornets were deployed during that time, which I will discuss for another day. As for the kit itself, it looks really promising. I'm not expecting it to be perfect fit. The tails are a little on the short side, although they may have been corrected this time around. I actually compared them to the Hosokawa tails, which are more accurate of the two. Really isn't much of a difference. Even though they're a little shorter, like the monogram tails, they're closer to the Hosokawa. So I think Kinetic corrected that, which is bonus points on their part. That's one thing. That's the big thing I like about Kinetic. They actually listen and correct as they go. As I said before, this is the 4th boxing. Decals. I meant to say instructions. Instructions. Do not follow these to the hilt. They're riddled with errors. I mean, and depending on what version you're building, you're going to have to thumb through everything and look at everything. Make sure you have plenty of reference on hand. I mean, everything is okay. Most part with the instructions are pretty good, but still, double check everything and check your references, because there's errors throughout this kit, and sometimes the areas are kind of vague. So I recommend double checking everything. The only other complaint, actually it's really not a complaint, it's more a nitpick, is I think they could have done, I mean they could have blown the Hosokawa kit out of the water, maybe, but it's definitely a good alternative to the Hosokawa kit, especially for the money. Because even though they threw in a generic ordnance, which is no big deal, given what the Hornet could carry, it's really a no-win situation. So Kinetic tried. You got to give them credit for it. But they do get a nice bonus. They still added the flare pod, and they also added the sniper pod and the lantern pod. Now the flare pod was mostly used by the C and the D that have a night attack capability, like the FA-18D that was used during Desert Storm by the Marines. They only had a couple flare pods, but they also used a pod similar to it during Desert Storm. So it's nice that they added the flare, they added the lantern, and they added the sniper pod. I think Australia and Canada used the lantern pod. I'm not sure. Check your references accordingly, but it's nice of them to add it. And if you don't want to use them, save them in a spare box. Rest of the ordnance, you're going to have to pick and choose. Most of it can be carried, but if you're doing, like, when the Hornet first entered service with Canada, Australia, and Navy and the Marines, you're going to have to get separate weapons. I mean, this is before JDAM. This is before all that. You know, basically dumb bombs and laser-guided bombs. But you can still use the laser-guided bombs. In fact, let me show you that. As I said before, matter of fact, when I said it was back to the F-16, save these rails when you're working on another Kinetic kit. Sometimes they jip you on rails. But as you can see here, cluster bomb, laser guided bomb, AMRAAMs, the JDAM here. So, depending on what era you're building in, pick and choose carefully. But like I said, it would have been nice if they added Sparrow missiles to it, because I'm sick of AMRAAMs. Otherwise, the rest of the kit itself, if you know your variants and you got your research, you could build all the variants in, just out of this boxing, especially as long as you have the decals. Don't mind the noise, by the way. Let's see if we can scoot down a little bit, get away from less noise. Don't mind that. That's liquid cement right there. So far it looks really good. Here it is. Here's the older style centerline pylon, by the way. I think the only other gripe I do have is it would have been nice of them to add the dual missile rail launchers, which they did use with the Hornet for the majority of its career. Otherwise, it looks really promising. The detail's really, really good. The scribing is on par with the Hosokawa kit, if not equally as good, but it doesn't seem as delicate. But since this is being a Kinetic kit, check your references. Make sure you have tools on hand in case you got to deal with any engineering troubles due to the engineering of the kit, I should say. Like, keep sprue cutters, keep some chisels, have a saw ready. Of course, sandpaper, files, the normal stuff. I have heard though that the fit is great in some areas, and the engineering is actually pretty clever. It's the assembly you got to worry about. If you're worried about aftermarket decals, there's still plenty of them available. I'm sure you can find a few old super scale sheets around. So I actually got a few of them. We'll talk about that in the next video, maybe. But the only other suggestion I would have with this kit is, even though the cockpit's fine, replace the ejection seat. You can always get one. Like I said, depending on what version you're building. It could be the Naval Aces ejection seat, which was used in the later variants of the FA-18 Hornet, or you can go with an SJU-5-6, which was used in the early version of the A and the B version of the Hornet, and early C and D models. Once again, check the references. Otherwise, this is actually worth the money. The kit itself can range anywhere from $50 to almost $80, depending on where you go. But it's worth it. It's definitely a value for the money, because not just because of the detail, but because, at least with this boxing, you can build practically every variant of the Legacy Hornet, starting from early FA, well, not super early, but early enough FA-18A or B. You can build C or D. You can do little subtle changes during production lots. You can build the ATARs equipped Hornet if you want to. Like I said, you just do your reference and go accordingly. Although the only thing I will say, the only gripe I have is the refueling probe. There's really no need for it, but some modelers do want to like show the bird all out with everything propped open and stuff. Like I said, this is definitely a good value for the money. Not just because of the ordnance, but because it covers practically every single update of the FA-18 throughout its service life. It is not just to the bird slicer antennas, but also the chaff flare dispensers, the ATARs, or the center line, little subtle things that you don't see that only true Hornet enthusiasts know. And depending on what country is using the Hornet, there's also other little things, so which I'm not sure about. But my best advice for this kit: just pay attention to what you're doing, keep reference on hand, and make sure you take your time in putting it together and stuff. It is a Kinetic kit, so this is not a slap together, or as the saying would go, it's not a wonder kit. You can't just throw glue and paint and there you go. This does take your time, but when you do, it's worth every penny. So this is what I got for now. I will be talking about the Hasegawa Hornet hopefully sometime soon, and happy modeling and take it easy, guys. Have fun.